joining us on what is, of course, a very difficult day for all of us here who care about free speech, democracy and justice. I'm Martha Spurrier, I'm part of the international legal team, and I'm joined here today by Sebastien Lai, Jimmy's son, and by Keelan Gallagher KC, who leads the international legal team. We are here to discuss the guilty verdict in Jimmy Lai's case, what it means, and what needs to happen now to bring this very courageous but frail man home to London before it is too late. I'm going to turn first to Sebastian, who will give his opening remarks, then over to Keelan, who will do the same, and then we'll open for questions. We have a hard stop at 10:45, just so everybody knows. Sebastian.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you all for coming. Look, I think one of the most surprising thing about this verdict isn't the fact that he's found guilty. I mean, this has been alluded to. His guilt has been alluded to by the government in the last few years. But what is surprising is that it's taken so long. We're almost 5 years in. He's spent the whole time in solitary confinement. As you would have heard from Martha, his health has rapidly declined. In fact, I was quite heartbroken to hear from my sister about all the reports, about what she was saying about his nails falling off, his muscles getting infected, his heart issues. I mean, it's no surprise that, in a Hong Kong prison cell, with the lights blocked off, heat traps in there. So Hong Kong, which has, in the last 2 years had 50 days above 33 degrees, it's much hotter in the cell itself. So having a now 70-year-old man baking in there, you could guess that all these problems come just as a result of that. But I think what is also of note is that in the 800-page verdict that they have, there's essentially nothing. There's nothing that incriminates him. There's nothing that even under their own legal system would make him guilty. And so this is an example. This is a perfect example of how the national security law has been molded and weaponized against someone who essentially said stuff that they didn't like. I think if we're talking about smear campaigns, which is what the Chinese government might call what we're doing now, and the reporting that you guys are doing, I think it's hard to smear the Hong Kong legal system more than this judgment and more than this trial. The reason why I'm here is to free my father, and in order to do that, the UK government has to do more. We've been very grateful of this report. You would have seen the statement from our Foreign Minister, Vet Cooper. But now it's time to put action behind words and make my father's release a precondition to closer relationships with China. Because how can you expect a fruitful relationship if they can't even put a 70-year-old man who's who's in such ill health on a plane and send him back home here in the UK where he belongs?
Thanks very much, everyone. Today's process was a farce and a sham. We had long known that this was a show trial, and today 3 hand-picked national security law judges in Hong Kong followed the predictable script. It's a stain on a once enviable Hong Kong legal system. A brave, brilliant 78-year-old man, Jimmy Lai, a British citizen and an Amnesty International prisoner of conscience, has been convicted in this vindictive and grossly unfair verdict, condemned for nothing more than being a successful publisher, a brilliant journalist, and a peaceful pro-democracy campaigner. Make no mistake, what we have seen today play out in a Hong Kong courtroom is a British man convicted of conspiracy to commit journalism, for running a newspaper with an opinion which was pro-democracy, pro-human rights, and unashamedly anti-corruption, and willing to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party. And for that, we are now facing the risk of a British man dying in prison for standing up for values which the international community holds dear. Much of the evidence, which was run through by the national security law judges in that farce this morning, related to activities prior to May 2020. So accusations of Jimmy Lai engaging on human rights issues and democracy issues with politicians from the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, here in Britain, in the United States, even including engaging with President Trump, for example, amongst the many politicians around the world. But this all happened before May 2020, before the national security law was even in force. So what we have seen is a man being convicted of a crime that didn't exist when he's supposed to have committed it, prosecuted under a law drawn up for that very purpose. And you don't need to just take our word for it. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, in a very clear ruling last year, found that Jimmy Lai was arbitrarily and unlawfully detained in flagrant violation of international law. They said he shouldn't have spent a single day in prison. Instead, he spent 5 years in prison, half a decade, when he's in his 70s, approaching the end of his life in circumstances where he has diabetes and where there's a very serious health risk to him. Some of you will know that on the day that Apple Daily's printing presses closed, it was called by Amnesty International the darkest day for democracy in Hong Kong. And I agree. Today, we're seeing the death knell for democracy in Hong Kong with what's happened to Jimmy Lai. And it's now time for the British government to work with its allies around the world and to ensure that this man can be brought home to his son Sebastian, to his grandchild, and to his wider family before it's too late and we see him die behind bars. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Keelan. So as I said, we've now got some time for questions. If you could say your name and where you're reporting from, that would be great. And we'll try and get as many in as we can before our stop at 1:45. Yes. Thank you. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time and then we'll answer them. Yes.
Hi, how are you doing? Federica Monique from Reuters News Agency. Sebastian, you said the UK government should do more. This morning, the UK government condemned the prosecution of your father to the United States. Do you feel that these statements are enough? What else do you think, kind of concrete measures could the UK government do to guarantee that your father comes home?
Thank you. Any other questions at this stage? Yeah.
For Shane Cage, when do you expect to be sentencing? Is there going to be litigation period? What do you expect the result to be after 5 years?
Thank you. Okay. Sebastian, do you want to start with the contact that you've had with the UK government?
Yeah.
And also whether these statements are enough, whether there's more concretely that can be done?
Sure. First of all, thank you for your question. Yes, so we are in contact with SEDO and I've met successive foreign secretaries. I think it does feel like, both from our end and I'm sure from their end, that this is something that will happen sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, because of his rapidly failing health, there isn't a lot of room or indeed time for his release to happen. Look, even over the last year alone, he's lost 10 kilos. So this is a man who is very much in a horrible situation. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is that we have been in contact with them, and I hope that, I hope that more is done. And in terms of what they can do, it's putting preconditions. We talk about a normalization relationship with China, right? Be it the visit that's going to happen in January. But how can we normalize relationship if they can't even do something so simple as to put a 70-year-old man who they've dragged through hell for the last 5 years, who all the evidence has been presented against him, witnesses have been tortured, and they've essentially found nothing. There's nothing that truly, nothing that incriminates him. They could sort of write 800 pages, 1,000 pages if they want, but in that, it's regarding his journalism. And if you ask the Hong Kong government today, they will still say that they have a free press, and that they have freedom of speech, and yada yada, which all of it is untrue, and especially untrue if they decide to go through with this. So it's making it very clear that if they want a good relationship, a fruitful relationship with China, with the UK and the US, that my father's release needs to be a precondition to that. And then regarding the sentencing, from my understanding, what I've heard from the courtrooms is that they're aiming January, but I don't know exactly. Yeah. Okay.
So, Chris, on your question about the sentencing, there is a mitigation hearing listed for the 12th to 15th of January 2026, and the indication is that the sentencing will follow as soon as possible thereafter. We don't know precisely what that means, but it's going to be early to mid-January is what we're looking at. The week of the 12th of January is when it's back in court. That's, of course, not just for Jimmy Lai, it's also for the other defendants, including the defendants who pleaded guilty, including the matter related to the witness who was tortured. The UN Special Rapporteur raised very serious concerns. So middle of January, and interesting to note that Prime Minister Keir Starmer is scheduled, according to reports, to be visiting China. So that's the timeline. On the second question from Reuters, could I just add one thing about whether the condemnations from the UK and US governments and others are enough? We're incredibly grateful for the fact that a number of states around the world have now both condemned Jimmy Lai's prosecution and indeed today condemned his conviction, and that they've called for his immediate and unconditional release. So the states that have done that already are the UK, the US, that's also been a call from the Canadian Parliament and the European Parliament. We've seen added to that list Australia has also made that call, so has Italy and a number of others. And a much wider group of states worldwide have condemned the politically motivated prosecution. And we're grateful for all of that support. But calls for this man to be immediately and unconditionally released are not enough. We now need a concrete plan and real robust action. And China needs to see that there are real consequences for what they are doing to Jimmy Lai in that cell in Hong Kong. There have got to be consequences. And the final thing I just want to flag in relation to that is, I would say that it's imperative that those states take more action, not only because it's the right thing to do, because this is an outrageous case about a man being detained for beliefs and for acting on human rights which are protected, but also because each of those governments themselves have been weaponised in the prosecution against him. And just in the last few hours, we've had a quick look at the number of times where certain people are mentioned in the judgment. And I'll just give you some examples. Baroness Helena Kennedy, our colleague here at Doughty Street Chambers, a Labour peer, sanctioned by China for daring to speak out for human rights, mentioned in the judgment twice. Lord Patton, former governor, also mentioned in the judgment. Ian Duncan Smith mentioned in the judgment 9 times, for example. Luke de Pulford, who runs the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, mentioned 161 times. Interparliamentary Alliance on China mentioned 215 times. President Trump 197 times. Nancy Pelosi 25 times. So what we've seen is Jimmy Lai's engagement with politicians around the world on issues he cared about, on human rights, on democracy, with politicians of all stripes, right-wing, left-wing, somewhere in between. His work doing that, vital work over years, has in fact been weaponised. So for years he's spent time standing up for people in Hong Kong, engaging with politicians around the world. Now it is time for politicians around the world to stand up for him and bring him home.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Amy. Just on the engagement of the UK, have you been able to engage with the Prime Minister before especially visit to China?
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Tony Wera from the Local Bigger. Just thinking about the forthcoming visit of the UK Prime Minister to China, do you think this might be a critical moment for the father case? Do you think it can lead to some pressure on China or due to make the stability in the country?
Thank you. Any other questions at this stage? Keelan, do you want to start answering? Those are 2 related questions,
Sure,
and then Sebastian, I'll come to you.
I'm afraid I couldn't hear the second question.
Is-
Can you just repeat it?
Is the Prime Minister's visit to China a pivotal moment?
The short answer is yes. Our view, as Sebastian's made very clear in his opening remarks, is that closer engagement with China must come in close alignment with ensuring that our interests are protected. And we are very concerned that there has been a headlong rush into closer and cosier relations without ensuring that our core interests are protected, including in particular British nationals detained behind bars. And there are some very stark examples of other countries around the world who've managed to secure the release of their citizens from China by taking a different strategic approach. I'll give you a few examples. The Australian government managed to secure the release of journalist Sebastien Lai, who was wrongly detained in China. And they did that essentially by saying that they wanted warmer relations with China and they wanted to have constructive discussions and increased trade, but they couldn't do that while their woman, an Australian citizen, was behind bars. We'd like to see the UK government taking a similar approach to that. Canada also managed to secure the release of the two Michaels who were wrongly detained in China. Ireland, my country, managed to secure the release of businessman Richard O'Halloran. The US government under the Biden administration secured the release of Pastor David Lynn, a pro-democracy campaigner of similar age to Jimmy Lai, and also of 3 other US nationals. Speaking frankly, if Australia can do it, if Canada can do it, if Ireland can do it, and if the US can do it, why can't the UK?
Sebastian, would you like to add anything on that?
No, I think that was, I think that was very answered. And yeah, look, I think it's an opportunity for him to put conditionalities, as I mentioned before.
Thank you. Yes. Do you want to answer that one? Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I can't go into too much. I can't go into too much detail about who I'm meeting in the government. But it's just to say that it feels like it does feel like there has been a change in gear, and everybody is on side.
Thank you.
I think it's worth just adding on that we are acutely conscious that the Prime Minister Starmer, who of course used to be head of our chambers here at Doughty Street, we're acutely conscious that Prime Minister Starmer is the first Prime Minister who personally made that call for Jimmy Lai to be immediately and unconditionally released. We're grateful for the fact that he raised the case directly with President Xi. So we feel that those are steps in the right direction, but we think now there needs to be a real change of pace. For many months and years we've heard from everyone, politicians of all stripes, multiple countries around the world, the UN and so on, that until the verdict, their hands are tied in terms of doing a deal or bringing this man home. Well, now we have the verdict. We're out of road, we're out of excuses. Now is the time to act.
Any other questions?
Slightly, because there's been a lot of cases of Hong Kong visitors targeted by campaigns, followers in Beijing there, especially. I was wondering whether you have an opinion about that, whether that's also encroaching on the right.
Yeah, look, obviously I think that's absolutely horrible. My heart goes out to all those people who are being targeted. I think it shows you the new Hong Kong government putting bounty on people's head. It's absolutely insane. I mean, I know some of them, it's just absolutely heartbreaking that this is happening to them. I also think that it gives you a greater idea. If they're willing to do something like this on foreign soil, it gives you a great idea of the brazenness that they're willing to do that in their own soil. So I think a lot of these stories maybe don't come out of Hong Kong, but I'm sure it's much worse there even than just just putting bounties on someone that lives in the US and the UK. Though obviously that should not happen either. In terms of me personally, look, I think the biggest threat they have for me is my father in prison in Hong Kong. There's nothing more than that. Obviously, sometimes I speak out, and sometimes they say, well, this might infringe on the national security law. But look, it's one of those laws that's so broadly written that even me speaking to you now could infringe on the national security law. So I don't care too much about that specific that specific point that they say. But yeah.
And just quickly to add in relation to transnational repression, obviously there's very serious concerns about transnational repression and China using the long arm of the state to target critical voices wherever in the world they may be. whether it's on the streets of London, the streets of Washington, D.C., in Germany, in Sweden, in the Philippines, wherever it may be. And that is deeply concerning. It is worth saying it's yet another indication of the lie which lies behind the one country, two systems approach, because in fact we now see that we no longer have one country, two systems. We've seen increasing CCP-ification of Hong Kong, and what's happening to Jimmy Lai is part and parcel of that, and what's happening with transnational repression is part and parcel of that. This is a thuggish system directed from Beijing, which is attempting to silence critical voices. And today, our focus is on one man who is facing far worse than many others of us who are targeted by the Chinese state here in London, because he is facing dying in prison for his beliefs and for standing up for truth, for freedom, for democracy, and simply for running a newspaper.
Yeah, it's a question, Caterina from Reuters, both for the legal team and Sebastian as well. Do you believe that Jimmy Lai, your father, will appeal his verdict, and do you think they should themselves appeal the verdict?
Before we come to that one, let me just see if there's any other questions in the room this round. Keelan.
Yeah, so I think you will know that there's a difference between the international legal team and the domestic legal team in Hong Kong, which runs his case. Obviously, for reasons related to the last question about transnational repression, although I represent Jimmy Lai, along with my very brilliant colleagues, we are unable to travel safely into Hong Kong to speak to him directly as matters stand, which is outrageous. On the question of an appeal, that's not a question for us as the international legal team. I expect his domestic team in Hong Kong will discuss that with him, but that's a matter for them. But let's be clear, Jimmy Lai has never wavered in proclaiming his innocence, and as you've all seen writ large in that farce of a judgment today, he is innocent, and in fact he's simply been convicted of things which should be protected under any proper democratic functioning system.
Sebastian, do you think we should appeal? What are your feelings about it?
I mean, look, I think Keelan said it best. I have no indication of what the local legal team will do, and I haven't seen my father in the last 5 years, so I can't tell you whether he will or will not. But I think, look, what we've seen today and actually over the past 5 years is a complete breakdown of the Hong Kong legal system. And I think with that, a trust in the Hong Kong legal system, and with that, a trust in Hong Kong as a financial centre. So I think, I can't speak on whether he would appeal or not, but I think it would be appealing in a system that is essentially broken and with a full deck of cards stacked against them.
For anyone who wants more detail, there is a right to appeal which needs to be exercised if it's exercised within 28 days. That's obviously a matter of Hong Kong law, which needs to be discussed by our client and his domestic legal team in Hong Kong.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. As President Trump seems to be on your side, on the Jimmy Lai side, do you have any trust? Do you have any hope that you can make things to this stage?
Yeah. Look, we're obviously incredibly grateful that the president has taken, has kept my father's case in his mind, and according to officials, has mentioned it to Xi Jinping. Yeah, 100%. Look, this is one of those things where the president has 1,000 things to think about every single day, and the fact that he's kept my father's case in his mind, I think says a lot. And we're so incredibly grateful, and yeah, it gives us a tremendous amount of hope. It gives us a tremendous amount of hope because obviously of the leadership in the US, but also because so many other countries have called out for his release. This is a case where I think when the Canadian Parliament passed the unanimous consent motion calling for Dad's release, where every single MP voted for it, they said, here's a man who represents the best in Canadian values. Values of freedom, values of democracy, and these are the same values that underpin our democracy, the US democracy, Italy's democracy, and I think it's an opportunity for people to put their to put their beliefs into action and support this man who, through his journey, has shown the importance of freedom and the importance of giving all that you have to defend these freedoms, and that the freedoms that hold us as a society together aren't freedom, aren't just ideas, and that they're made real through my father's fight.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Bruno Matheus from the Portuguese Agency. Question: would you like to see an international front to coordinate some kind of plan that you mentioned was needed to put pressure on China? And second, how urgent is the release of your dad? You said you lost about 10 kilos in 1 year. What is the status?
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Amy.
One related to that. Do you think there's more play in geopolitical the US or the UK?
Yeah. So on the first question, yes, I would like to have and part of my language, a united front to secure my father's release, because there's so many countries that have already called out. In fact, when the Foreign Minister Yvette Cooper went to the G7, she secured a agreement for all the countries in the G7 to work to secure my father's release. So yes, that would be incredibly helpful. That would put a lot of pressure on Hong Kong and Chinese government, and to show that they can't get away with this very blatant persecution of our beliefs. And in terms of who has the most leverage, I honestly don't know. I think the fact that both of these countries, the UK and the US, are working together is how we get my father out.
Just to add quickly on the question about how urgent this is, Sebastian has described the difficult circumstances that his father's now in with his health declining. Because, of course, many of us will know some 78-year-olds who are very fit and healthy and so on, and many 78-year-olds who are not. Jimmy Lai is diabetic, which is critical, and he's now been in solitary confinement for 5 years, for half a decade. Now, as a matter of international law, if you are in solitary confinement for a period of more than 14 days, that's called prolonged solitary confinement. And there's a very strong evidence base showing that anyone who is in prolonged solitary confinement has an increased risk of death, and that risk of death is increased even further if they are elderly or if they are diabetic. And Jimmy Lai is both. And we did some analysis a number of months ago looking at all of the cases where prisoners who are detained in Hong Kong have died of apparently natural causes, but within a very short period of time after being sent to hospital. And what we found was that there's a particular problem in the Hong Kong system for elderly and diabetic prisoners. They are not getting the right health care sufficiently urgently, and they are being transferred to hospital where they are dying routinely within the last 48 hours, within 48 hours of being transferred from prison. And I'm afraid we are very, very seriously concerned about risk to Jimmy Lai's life and his health. That's not just a concern for me, it's a concern shared by the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, by the UK and US governments, and by the European Union, Canadians and Australians and many other countries around the world. So this could not be more urgent. And delays of weeks, months, years may mean him dying behind bars. This is a difficult conversation for me and Sebastian to have, particularly difficult for Sebastian to be spelling out the risk to his father. But that is the reality that we're now in. And the other question that we had relating to the international front to coordinate a plan to put pressure on China, we're very grateful to all the states that have stepped up to call for Jimmy Lai's release. We'd like to see more states call for his immediate and unconditional release. And we'd like to see more states working together to show China the very real practical consequences if Jimmy Lai dies behind bars and if they don't do the right thing and now release him. It's no use simply shouting into the wind and making a call for him to be released. What is the plan to get him out and bring him home?
Yeah, I would like to just outline the health issues again. As I said before, and as Keelan put so well, look, he's been having heart issues as well, right? Like he had to be hooked up to heart monitor and on one of the days and couldn't go to trial. And again, in the Hong Kong prison conditions where he is held, I think the cells are 6 foot by 10 on average. We heard about the sort of horrible temperatures that he's being. The temperatures, as I said before, goes up to 33, 34, 35 degrees, and in the cell, with the heat blocked off, with trapping the heat in there, sometimes goes up to 44 degrees at the highest. It's torture, and he's there by himself. And if you're in a situation like this, obviously religion is incredibly important to you, and they know that, and because of that, they don't give him mass. He's not allowed to attend mass, and frequently he's also denied the Eucharist. So this has been, I think, it is obviously incredibly worrying because of his age and his underlying health conditions, but I think it's also been unnecessarily cruel how he's being held, and all that is an attempt to essentially break him.
Thanks, Sebastian. We've got time for a couple more questions if anyone would like to ask anything.
Just on personal note, Sebastian, what's your personal feeling on this after waiting 5 years for an answer that for 5 years ago that they were given the news about it? What's your personal feeling after 5 years, this finally arrives?
Obviously it's I knew it was coming. I think everybody knew that it was coming. Again, surprised that it took so long, but it's still painful. I feel horrible because not only does it signify my father being in jail for longer, potentially for hopefully not, touch wood, but potentially for the rest of his life, but also signifies a Hong Kong that has completely changed. A Hong Kong that is no longer governed by logic and rationality, a Hong Kong that, a government that is spiteful and hateful. Look, I haven't seen him in 5 years, and it hasn't been an easy 5 years, but I think every single day that I do this or just get on with life, I'm constantly reminded of my father and a little Hong Kong cell, and I always worry if the next text that I get is going to be someone telling me that something bad happened to him, or if I get a call early in the morning, is it because there's new news coming out of Hong Kong? It's been it's not great.
I just wanted to say one final thing from my perspective. It's obviously very difficult hearing just how much this is affecting Sebastian personally. Sebastian has been unable to see his father for the last 5 years simply because he is speaking out and raising human rights concerns. Sebastian himself has also been threatened with prosecution simply for addressing the United Nations and for raising human rights concerns. So this is a bully government trying to silence anyone who stands in their way, whether it's Jimmy Lai, his son Sebastian Lai, or anyone else. And the final thing I just wanted to say is, we've of course been very clear with the UK government that Jimmy Lai's release should be a precondition, in our view, to any deeper engagement between China and the UK. Jimmy Lai is a British citizen. He's only a British citizen. He's only ever held a British passport. And we would now like to see, today and in the coming days, real concrete action by the British government fighting for a British citizen who's wrongly convicted and imprisoned abroad. We're very grateful for that very strong statement this morning from the Foreign Secretary, from Yvette Cooper. Very welcome to see that. It's also important, frankly, that Prime Minister Starmer speaks directly with President Xi, picks up the phone, talks directly, and we hope he'll use every opportunity to raise Jimmy Lai's case, press for his release before it's too late. Our view is that when dealing with Beijing, these cases can only be resolved at the highest levels, leader to leader. And it's why the Prime Minister, President Trump, And leaders of freedom-loving states around the world need to pick up the phone, speak to President Xi, and get this done and bring him home. Thank you.
Thanks, Keelan. So thank you all so much for coming. It's so important, as you know, that this case continues to be covered, as you have done with this unfair trial and now with its culmination in an unfair conviction. It, of course, ensures that some light is shed on this corrupted system. And we hope, therefore, that there is pressure on everyone who has some leverage in this situation to bring Jimmy home before it's too late. Logistically, we now have a run of one-to-one interviews with Sebastian. They'll take place in a different room. I've got an absolutely wild schedule, as you can imagine. We're going to try and keep it tight and to time. If you can just bear with me and my colleagues, we will make sure that everyone on the list gets their FaceTime with Sebastian. We're going to take a break of about 5-10 minutes now. So if you've got any questions, come and find me, and then I will be calling out names and coming to find you so that you get your slot, and we should be done by just after lunch. Thank you all.
Thank you.